Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. I just broke a record, folks. Over what? How many episodes? 2,000 something stupid? 2,244 episodes, including this one, not including Packernet After Dark. It's the longest I've ever held it, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes you just got to break a record. Know that you still got the stuff, got the juice for it. I rock ice, I rock ice. Kind of a crazy day today. The day is still going on for me, so we will continue the craziness as we go along here, but I won't bury the lead. The excitement for the day began with a man by the name of Corbin K. Smith. He's a Seahawks reporter, Emerald Spectrum host of Locked On Seahawks, guest on Fox 13 Seattle, 933 KJR, whatever. Here was his big announcement. Hearing through multiple sources that the Seahawks have spoken with a couple of teams about DK Metcalf's availability this week in Indy. As John Schneider has pointed out before, simply talking to another team doesn't mean a trade is imminent, but worth keeping an eye on. About an hour later, comes out and says, from my understanding, Seattle is actively shopping Metcalf, but at least one team that has inquired feels that they have the trade package in place to make Schneider strongly consider pulling the trigger, and he's at least been willing to listen. Excuse me, Seattle isn't. I was like, why does this not make any sense? Isn't actively shopping him. One team to keep close tabs on, he said after that, the Packers. A source indicated they have had discussions with Seahawks this week and have an offer on the table that includes a high pick and a young receiver on roster to acquire Metcalf. Obvious connection to Schneider as well. Now, they had said that I even told you they have plans for DK. They're not going to move DK, whatever. He gets called on that, and here's what he had to say. And I've been talking about this constantly. The fact that a team says, oh, we definitely want him, doesn't necessarily mean anything. We're not going to do it doesn't mean anything. Here's what he says. Yes, I heard Mike McDonald and John Schneider's comments on DK Metcalf this week. I was there. I also was there when Pete Carroll and John Schneider talked about Russell Wilson before the trade happened. Remember, they said they were not going to trade him, and 5 seconds later he got traded. Which is not only to say that things changed, it's to say that it was almost a done deal. It's not like they didn't plan on it and then something happened. They were fully immersed in the trade talks when they said that they were not going to trade him. He goes on to say, not saying DK is getting moved, but talks beyond a simple, hello, he's not available, have happened. He then goes on to say, based on what I've heard, for Seahawks to move DK Metcalf, trade would have to be structured to receive number 23 and either Romeo Doubs or Dontavian Wicks in exchange for receiver and one of their early day 3 selections. Anything less than that, it's not happening. I can just tell you right now, I can almost guarantee that's not happening. That is way too high for DK Metcalf. I like DK Metcalf. He is a good receiver. I have no objections to him with his 992 yards and 5 touchdowns and 74 PFF grade, 1.81 yards per route run, which is very mediocre. I like DK Metcalf. 27 is not massively old. He just turned 26. It's not like turning 28, so 27 is pretty young. I mean, he could be on the team for another 5 years. That's worth quite a bit. But he is coming off the worst year of his entire career, which would bring up some questions. I wouldn't give up a first for him, I don't think, period, much less a first and a player. Could happen, but I don't know, man. That seems a little steep. That could also just be, negotiating whatever, this, that, or the other. But more than likely, if that is the case, to me, that means it's not happening. Peter Bukowski quote tweeted it and said, I can confirm Corbin's reporting here. League source told me Green Bay has been working on this and has an offer they think can land DK Metcalf. Then the hope is trading Jair to backfill some of the lost draft capital if they can get it. Now, as we move on, this gets a lot more murky, but I just want to point out, Corbin is locked on Seahawks. Bukowski is locked on Packers. I'm sure they're talking about the exact same source. So the question is the source a good source or not? So really confirming it doesn't change a ton. It's not the same as somebody else saying, yeah, I've been asking around and I've heard the same thing from different sources. He goes on to say, per a league source, Packers have been open to the idea of moving their first-round pick for DK Metcalf, in part because, as Peter Bukowski reported, they believe they can get similar compensation back for cornerback Jair. So we're living in a fantasy world right now where the Packers are going to give up a first for DK and then get back a first or a high second for Jair. I mean, look, if that's the case, I'm in. I'm all the way in. I don't even give a crap. We'll overpay for DK. If you're going to give me a second back for Jair, go for it. I don't know what universe we're living in. Aside from, and let me point this out. This is one thing to consider. First of all, the value is what people are willing to pay for it. So looking at past years isn't necessarily, everybody, well, look at this guy got traded for this or that. It depends on the year. And as Gutekunst pointed out, very weak free agent class, which does raise the price of trades, right? The value you're willing to pay for our cornerback when there are no cornerbacks in free agency worth a damn goes up, right? I saw somebody, I forget who it was it C. Coles? I can't remember, but said, yeah, give up 23 for DK and give Jair to the Ravens for 30. It's like, we're living in a absolute fantasy land. I 1,000,000,000% would do that, but there's no way. He goes on to say, I'm sticking with what I've reported. I trust the sources I've spoken with. Teams are going to do what they can to cover themselves this time of year. So now we're getting into the point where this is being refuted. We'll get to that. I just want to continue going through what he had to say. He did comment on the Jair thing and said, second rounder is top of the chain. I don't think they'd get a first, but a day 2 selection isn't out of the realm of possibility. Point is, Packers believe they can get draft capital back. Again, a third is iffy, but I mean, if the trade-off is essentially we give up, let's say, Romeo Doubs and Jair Alexander and pick 23, we get DK and a second-round pick. I'm fine with that. Third-round pick, I'm getting a little iffy on it. But there's also a chance we can get something back from the Seahawks. It'd probably be a day 3 pick, as I've seen people talk about. So you'd be talking about, okay, Romeo and Jair and 23. We get back DK, a third and a fourth, maybe? Or, yeah, third and a fourth. All right, I guess, sure. So we get no first-round pick, a second, 2/3, 2/4. Anyways, the report was then refuted by Matt Schneidman. He says, according to a source, there has been no contact or negotiations as of now between the Packers and Seahawks regarding a DK Metcalf trade. Now, this becomes kind of a weird situation, kind of like what I had said yesterday, where the more trustworthy people become the least trustworthy people. So, for example, if Ian Rappaport right now came out and doubled down on the report saying there has been no contact, the reason I don't trust it is because their sources are better, which seems counterintuitive, but at the end of the day, there are certain people that are not supposed to be talking about things. Those people go to people that'll put it out there. So, for example, let's say I was sitting somewhere and I overheard Brian Gutekunst talking to somebody else, and I ran to Ian Rappaport and I said, I just heard this. He's going to talk to his sources, and those sources would be in the Packers organization, the Seahawks organization, and what would they say? Nope, no, not a thing, officially not a thing. And he's not going to report it, even if he thinks that they're lying, because now he becomes like a news rag, this rumor column thing, and he pisses off his sources. But if I go to like somebody like me, if I go to some podcaster or YouTuber, they're going to report it. And then what's going to happen? The teams are going to find out that it got leaked. Let's just assume it's true. The teams are going to find, because again, I heard it. The teams are going to hear that it's getting leaked. Either they're going to hear it and they're going to reach out and say, squash this, or you're going to have somebody like Schneidman or Ian Rappaport or whatever reach out to a source in, a good source in the organization, and they're going to say, absolutely not, shut that down. They're not going to say shut it down because they don't want to say, hey, lie for me. They're going to say, no, there's been no contact. Now, it could also be entirely true because, again, Schneidman probably has much better sources. The problem with the better sources is that the better sources would lie if it was true. So I can't trust them. It becomes a self-defeating thing. There's no way that I could trust it. Because if it was true and if it was not true, they would say the same thing. So it really just comes back to whoever this Seattle Seahawks guy is and whoever Peter Bukowski is talking to, whoever that source is, do they know what they're talking about? Did they get bad information? He might be a good source or something, but maybe he just heard bad information, or maybe he misunderstood the information. I don't know. But this is where we're at right now. And who knows, maybe the Packers would. I like I said, I think the Packers are planning to be aggressive. This would be over-the-top aggressive. Obviously, financially, we have the leeway to be aggressive, but giving up a first-round pick in a trade is a whole other level for the Green Bay Packers. Now, before we move off of this, I do want to comment on the obvious response that I've gotten from several people. And the obvious response is, who cares? We can't draft in the first round anyway. Now, and this one is, there are certain situations where you kind of just know something is wrong, but it's harder to kind of explain why. There are several things that come to mind, but the best explanation that I can think of to explain why I don't like this idea is, and I had to run to the robot to kind of help me with some terminology so I at least come off a little bit smart. But in terms of logical fallacies, it would be hasty generalization. But let me break down the general idea here. Remember that the NFL draft is largely a luck game. And ultimately, everybody's going to create their own big boards. And all these NFL big boards are very, 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 very similar. Very similar. Shockingly similar. Especially in the earlier rounds. So the range of picks that the Packers might select at pick 23, or whatever pick they have at 1, is very small. And it's the same pool that everybody else would be picking from, with very minor, a couple little fringe people here and there, second-ish round picks that a few people would maybe put into the worth 23 camp that other people wouldn't. But the bottom line is that pool, and there's a pool for everybody, right? The second round, third round, fourth. And once you get into the later rounds, it starts to expand a little bit. The boards differ slightly, but, they're still largely the same pool of players. So when you look at the picks as pools, you understand that, and again, at this point, it becomes largely a luck game. It's kind of like the study of monkeys selecting stocks, and it turns out that they did just as well or better or whatever than actual people that work in the stock market, because it's not as much of a science as people seem to think that it is. And all the science really goes into creating these big boards, right? The science is done, and all the teams have basically the same science, which creates and gets you to the point where everybody kind of ranks these players. Now it's just a question of grabbing one. And which one you grab is largely, I'm saying it as large as I can without using the word entirely. Largely luck. So, if you're looking at these as pools, we got a pick 23 pool, we have a second round pool, third round pool, fourth round pool. The pool at 23 is more valuable than our second round pool. It carries with it intrinsic value because the players that are available at this spot are going to have a higher percentage chance of being good players than the second round. Now, how can you explain then the fact that they've had a higher miss rate than maybe would be expected? I can't say than most teams, but let's just say probably worse than most teams. I'm not going to grant you Jair or Rashawn. You're wrong if you say that those are misses, because they're not. Both of them have had injury issues. Both of them have been premier players at the top of their position. Jair has been one of the best corners in the entire NFL that only these last couple years has had issues because of injury. That's not a miss in terms of talent evaluation, and neither is Rashawn Gary. His play last year dipped for the first time in his entire playing career. Pretending he's always been that way and it was a missed pick is stupid. But I'll grant you the rest of the picks. Not Jordan Morgan, by the way. That's not a miss. That's a guy that was injured and wasn't able to play. Why were there so many misses? Because we're dealing with such an unbelievably small sample size. If it's just a matter of luck, and let's just pretend that it is a matter of luck, largely, some teams are going to have a ton of hits, and it's not because of talent. Some teams are going to have a bunch of misses, and it's not because they're stupid. The idea that the Packers just have some kind of flawed philosophy where in the first round they're bad, but in the second round they're really, really, really talented, as though it would be better to just straight up trade a first round pick for a second. I'm not talking about trading back and getting additional value. I'm saying if you could trade back to 34 Just trade 34 for 23 straight up. It's a win-win proposition because the Packers are more likely to pick a better player at 34 than they are at 23, and obviously the team that traded up would have a better pick, so they'd be happy too, is silly on its face, and you know that it is. This is becoming superstition. We're all becoming jaded and bitter for obvious reasons. For the same reason that we were upset about the third round, where it felt the same way, where it's like, I'd rather just trade out of the third and get into the fourth because they seem to do better in the third, but it's a silly belief. And a lot of these silly beliefs, just like they would never draft a wide receiver in the first, come down to the fact that we're always dealing with extremely small sample sizes. Look at their last 5 picks, is a comment that somebody said. It's 5 picks. Your sample size is 5? You got to stop, man. The bottom line is the pool of players at 23 is going to be better than the pools of players in the second round, and the odds of getting a superstar are way higher at 23. The odds of getting a good player are higher at 23. The odds of getting a non-bust are higher at 23. It's a weird trend. It's weird, and by the way, it's weird that the Packers are so good in the second round, but it doesn't mean they're going to continue to be good in the second round. They're going to miss in the second round. There's not some weird voodoo that they have, that they just have this elite talent to pick out second rounders. Now, you could argue that there's a couple little things here and there, and we've tried to play with that a little bit, and that can be true where, you're looking for certain things at certain positions at certain times in the draft, and you could maybe tweak that a little bit. But just like the third round picks were always bad and we should never do it until Tucker Kraft came around, and suddenly, oh, never mind. Still don't like third round picks. And I'm saying I feel the same thing you're feeling, but we're going to have to use our rationale and not go with our gut here, which our gut says trade away the first because it's stupid anyways, because we can never do anything good anyways. That's not rational. That's emotional. But all right, let's come off of that. We'll take a break. We'll come back. There's been a bunch of other momentum as far as Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers and all the other shoes that are falling. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. So, Matthew Stafford, I was about to do this podcast and tell you that it's almost a done deal. That was the report. It was almost a done deal. He's going to the Raiders. Apparently, the New York Giants and Raiders had a deal on the table, with the Raiders having slightly more leverage, either with the contract or whatever the situation was, and it was just about done. Well, then we get this. Ian Rappaport, the Rams and quarterback Matthew Stafford can't quit each other just yet. The two sides are closing in on a deal for Stafford to return to L.A. After talks with the Raiders and Giants, Stafford ends up taking less than he would have gotten elsewhere to stay. It was kind of weird because if you look at, for example, Benjamin Albright, he says, Raiders had a lot of internal optimism earlier in the week. Giants tried, but Stafford wasn't interested. Pittsburgh and Cleveland called, no interest from Stafford. So it sounds like Stafford just wasn't interested really in leaving a ton, which kind of is, it's kind of interesting because it feels like the Stafford thing was a bluff. You know what I mean? I mean, think about it. The Rams said, we're not giving you that. We'll give you this lesser amount. Stafford says, well, I'm not taking that. And they said, okay, I'll tell you what. You go out there, see if you can find more, and we'll talk. He goes out, he finds more. Right? They said he took less with LA. He finds more. He comes back. He says, okay, I have offers for this much. Are you going to match it or am I going to leave? And the Rams said, no, we're not going to match that. So now it's up to Stafford. What are you going to do? Are you going to go or are you going to stay here for less? What did he do? He stayed for less. So, I mean, it's pretty brilliant stuff from the Rams. I mean, maybe they legitimately were just ready to let him go. That or they just called his bluff. I mean, it is interesting that they didn't mention he didn't want to go to the Raiders. They said he didn't want to go, or Benjamin Albright said Giants tried, but Stafford wasn't interested. Pittsburgh and Cleveland called, Stafford wasn't interested. The Raiders, all he said is Raiders had a lot of internal optimism earlier in the week. But he must not have been interested, because if the Raiders are putting more on the table for you, and it's about the money, why don't you just go? He must not have been interested. Well, if you're not interested in the Raiders or the Giants or Pittsburgh or Cleveland, did you really want to go anywhere? I think this was just a negotiating tactic, and either the Rams were legitimately willing to let him go, like we don't care, or they were really betting on him bluffing and they nailed it. So good for them. It's very much a kind of a Brian Gutekunst thing of just, I'm not backing down. This is the number. Well, I'm not taking that. Okay, we'll see if you can find more. Found more. Well, screw you. This is still the number. Fine. I'll leave. I really will. Okay, I guess you got to leave. I'm going to leave. I'm calling him right now. I'm calling Tom Brady. Me and Tom Brady, we're best friends. We went skiing. You don't even know. I love that guy. And I love skiing now. This is the thing that I do. I ski and I hang out with Tom Brady. You think I won't go to Vegas? Vegas is great. I would love to take my wife and kids and have them raised in a place like Las Vegas. That's what I want to do with Tom Brady. We're going to go out and party. It's going to be wonderful. I don't even know if he has kids. I know he has a wife. It's going to be the best thing I've ever done, man. Okay, bye. Fine. No, wait. Screw it. Nope. And poor Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I don't know, but man, he would have loved, and you think the deal's basically done. He's in California. He's a California guy. He's training in California right now. He could have probably walked across the street and talked to the Rams organization and got a deal done that day. And here comes Stafford. Basically, the Rams are saying, okay, bye. The Raiders are saying, okay, just sign on the dotted line. And Rodgers is sitting there just rubbing his hands like, oh, yeah, go, man, go. And Stafford's like, nah, I'll stay here. It's fine. Because to be fair, Stafford's career is almost done. It's probably a difference of a very little amount of money, all told. He's very comfortable with the Rams. He has a home there. Everything's fine there, and he has a team that can compete. The Raiders aren't going to compete for jack squat. I understand the Raiders want to up their profile, and they know they're a better team with Stafford, and maybe they can add a couple pieces and possibly be a respectable team. But this is not a team that's going to turn around and win a Super Bowl because of Matthew Stafford in 1 year or even 2 years. The Raiders are using Stafford as a stepping stone. And I think Stafford knows that. If you want to go somewhere and compete, you have one option, and it's the Rams. Maybe Pittsburgh. Maybe. They've been spiraling a little bit, but maybe. But he decided to go back to the Rams, and now apparently there is a massive push by the Giants, who are, we've been saying since day one, the Giants are desperate for a quarterback. Desperate. They were all in on Matt Stafford. Didn't pan out. He never wanted to go there. Now, apparently, they have turned their guns full blazing on Aaron Rodgers. Diana Rossini says the New York Giants are now shifting their interest to Aaron Rodgers. They've been discussing it all week in Indy, per sources. Adam Schefter says with Matthew Stafford remaining with the Rams, the New York Giants are investigating all veteran quarterback options, including Aaron Rodgers, per sources. I think the biggest question has been, we understand why maybe the Giants would want to do it, but would Rodgers really want to go to the Giants? There was, who is this? Jonathan Jones of CBS, well, for whatever reason. He says that there certainly has been interest from Aaron Rodgers' side. So I don't know how strong that is or whatever, but seems like there is interest going in both directions. We'll see how that pans out. The Steelers were kind of the big name for a long time. I had mentioned that it didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but it could absolutely happen. You could see some reason for interest on both sides, but ultimately I couldn't quite get there. There was talk about the Steelers, and now they need to kind of change gears because Stafford is off the market. Not that they were really super in contention, but the name that was left off the list of where they're pivoting to, obviously Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are, we had mentioned they're planning on keeping one of them, but also Sam Darnold. No mention of Aaron Rodgers at all. Might still happen, but it just seems kind of interesting. By the way, I want to point something out too that is worth mentioning. News can drop at any time. There can be nothing official that happens, but you can agree on a deal. That is to say, we could hear in the next 5 seconds the Green Bay Packers have agreed on a deal. Jair has been traded, or the Packers have acquired, or whatever. So, we're not officially in like the anything can happen period officially, but news can break of a deal that has been agreed to. So keep your head on a swivel. And I will say there are some DBs that are flying here. There's some names that we're going to have to talk about. We're not going to do it today because I tried to do that yesterday, try to cram in like, here's the summary when it was happening / just ended. And it's kind of hard to get your bearings. So I'll probably give it a little bit of time to marinate here, but just watching some of these guys, I don't know how many times I've watched and just said, man, Gutekunst is all over that. Oh, man, Gutekunst is all over. Oh, man, Gutekunst is all over. From the edge, some of the edge guys yesterday, and now especially some of the DBs are just getting me excited. I know 40 time is not the be-all, end-all, but just knowing the athleticism that these guys have, there's a couple 4.3, potentially 4.2. We'll see what this guy can do here. Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, if he's able to crack that. He ran a 4.3 flat and was pissed about it. This dude wants to come out and break the record, which, by the way, he's not the only one. You got a wide receiver coming up that wants to do the same. We'll see how it goes. There's another 4.4 flat guy. So plenty of athleticism at the DB position. So I'm again, doesn't mean they can play football necessarily, but I'm excited about the prospect of even if you don't get them early, there might be some depth to this class as far as getting some corners. And they even got me a little excited about Jahdae Barron. That dude ran a fantastic 40. Apparently, DJ Daniel Jeremiah, he's saying, I see him more as a nickel, but he compared him to Brian Branch, which it's hard to not get excited about that. I did not like him as a prospect, but there's no denying what he's been able to do as sort of a safety slot type of guy. Listen, I would take it. I don't like our slot situation. If you could tell me that he was Brian Branch, but when he ran that 40, it's kind of okay, checked another box for can he play outside. So possibly add his name to the list of potential interests. In fact, I got it right here. Isaiah Bond wants to break the 40-yard dash time. Xavier Worthy's last year. It feels kind of impossible, but at the same time, we know how this goes. Guys just keep getting faster and faster. There's going to be a top end, obviously, as far as humans can run, but it's going to get broke. I don't know if that's proper English, but it's going to get broke. You guys ever have Mike's Hot Honey? I've never bought it. I know it's kind of a big deal. I'm not a huge honey person, but that seems pretty dope. I just saw, was it KFC or something? Using Mike's Hot Honey? I don't know. Don't worry about me. I'm just having my own little conversation. Sometimes I forget I'm doing the podcast, all right? You're my only friend. Sometimes I want to talk to you. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. All right, I'll tell you what. Let's take a break. We've got a little bit of news here, which is hilarious considering what we just talked about yesterday, which was, the Packers are not going to be very active in free agency. We've got a very conflicting report coming up on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. It was kind of funny because, yesterday was the day of Packers are not going to be interested in free agency. And I said, well, it's kind of, we're kind of elaborating and speaking something into, we're making something bigger out of what the actual quote was. Saying this free agent class sucks is not the same as saying we're not going to be aggressive, we're not going to do anything. And then today what happens? Immediately, boom, Packers are looking at throwing a first-round pick at DK Metcalf. It's like, holy crap, talk about aggressive, right? It's not true. It's, okay, well, whatever. We'll see. But it's, already we're starting to see the signs of some aggression. Oh, man, Jahdae Barron ran a 4.4 flat again. By the way, just a couple little things. I'm not going to get super into whatever, but just as it happens. So Trey Amos was kind of a big winner. Apparently speed was a little bit of a concern for him, and he's running mid-4.4s. He just ran a 4.44, I think it was. So there's a lot of excitement, right, as far as, can't he, if it was more of a making sure he doesn't fall outside of this range, because if he does, that could be a problem. Now that he's comfortably in it, now it's all bets are off on Trey Amos. So that's another guy to kind of keep an eye on out of Ole Miss. Ole Miss it's that school this year. But anyways, back to the Packers. A lot of talk about, whether or not Packers are going to be aggressive. Apparently they're not, because they don't like anybody, and so they're just going to sit around and pout and moan. Here is Rob Domofsky on ESPN Milwaukee with Wilde and Tausch. That's what it is.
I did, even though I was not at the Combine, I did talk to some agents that have been there and are still there. One or two of which, who actually met with the Packers. And by meeting with the Packers, that usually means Russ Ball or Goody or John Eric Sullivan or one of the high-ranking people. And the agents told me specifically, this is what he said to me, your team is going to be a player in free agency this year. And that's, based on, this agent having players that are going to be free agents. And, I'm probably not giving away too much here, I don't think, without having done, some more thorough reporting on it. But this agent was left with the impression that the Packers are going to be in the cornerback defensive line, and receiver market.
Boom.
So, I mean, obviously, you're not going to get all three, right? Like, and one name that.
Well, it's not necessarily obvious. You can, but it's kind of a trade-off. That's what I talked about before. Oh, here comes Harrison's second attempt. That's what we talked about before, which is you can get the Myles Garrett, but that's probably it, right? And aside from maybe a couple scraps here and there. Or you can maybe get a couple of the lower end guys. And with the free agent class not being super stacked with high end people, right? There's a difference between trade and free agent. It is possible. I mean, look at what the Packers did in 2019. They got a safety, they got a tackle, they got 2 pass rushers. 429, he did it. But they got a lot of stuff, you know what I mean? And they're in a much better financial situation than they were. I mean, not that they were in a bad situation in 2019, but this is as good of a situation financially as the Packers have been in since I've been doing the podcast for sure. So you can get all three. It's just kind of a question of what exactly they're going to be doing.
That was mentioned to me. I got my little handy. I have an agent who sends me this chart, and it's the print on it is so small. But he does values for every player who's going to be a free agent. APY averages. He's usually pretty close on. And one guy that I had heard to keep an eye on with the Packers was DJ Reed, who
love that.
This chart list says about a $14 to $15 million a year guy. That seems like it might be a fit for the Packers.
I had specifically mentioned DJ Reed. It's funny because every time I come on here and I say there's no good free agents, DJ Reed is just in the back of my mind going, hey, don't forget, dude, I'm pretty freaking good. I very much a fan of DJ Reed. I mean, if they got DJ Reed as a free agent and made a trade for DK Metcalf, I would be really saddened by the lack of edge rush. We'll see what happens with Max Crosby. I mean, look, if you can trade a first and a second, not that this is my favorite thing, especially with the Packers having the draft in Green Bay. I understand, that whole thing, but do what you got to do. If you lost a first and a second and ended up with DJ Reed at corner and DK Metcalf and Max Crosby, again, it would suck for the draft, and it's certainly a very risky situation to put yourself in to not have a pick until the third, although with Jair, maybe you pick up a second, third or something, possibly get back into the second. Who knows? But anyways, I'm getting out over my skis here. The point is, it wouldn't even, there's really not even a contradiction here. There seems to be a contradiction between the two reports, but there's not a contradiction between Rob Domofsky and what he is hearing and saying and what Brian Gutekunst said, which is what the report was based on. Brian Gutekunst is simply saying there really are not Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney's in this draft class. Or, excuse me, in the free agency class. And there's not. But so what? Right? Because, I mean, again, I'll go back to 2019 again. Adrian Amos was fantastic, but Adrian Amos was not Xavier McKinney. It's a different thing. It's a different thing to be a young guy still on your rookie contract or just coming off your rookie contract that is and has been at the top of a position. It's a very rare thing. I mean, you look at Adrian Amos was maybe the third, fourth, fifth best safety, presumably. I mean, he was probably my favorite option, but he was not one of the top guys, and he was 26 or something. I don't think he was on a rookie contract. I think he was on his second contract. Za'Darius was a rotational guy. He wasn't even a starter. And Preston was just seen as sort of like a run defender. It was a very aggressive free agent class that was very, very productive. So, look, I've been saying I have a feeling they're going to be very aggressive. I absolutely believe. I mean, again, what Domofsky's saying, he's talking to agents, and agents are like, Packers are blowing me up, dude. They're all in my face about all these different guys, and they just have a feel on the Packers, and you have to be aggressive if you want to be aggressive, if that makes any sense. You can't be passive. You can't wait for things to come to you. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Packers are in Indy, and yeah, they're all up in Schneider's face about DK Metcalf, and they're working the phones like crazy because you got to be fast. These guys are going to start leaving. They're going to start missing these opportunities. So if you're going to make a big play, you got to do it early. You got to be working the agents. You got to be working the GMs. You gotta be up and at him. And that is what happened in 2019, too. It was one of the first, on that first day when the announcements came, it was like, boom, immediately. It was, I think Preston was first, like Preston Smith, like, oh, dang, that's crazy. And then it was Za'Darius, and then it was Amos, and then it was Billy Turner. It was like, what is going on right now? It was a shocking departure from what we were used to with Ted Thompson. And it was just, it's not even necessarily because, that's just, how the different GM operates. It is a little bit, but it just had more to do with the situation. The situation was we were in a complete overhaul. We needed players. We were at the end of Rodgers' tenure, so we needed to act fast. We had a little bit of wiggle room for once, and he wanted to go and rebuild this team, and he did. And so we will see. I mean, man, DJ Reed, I had mentioned that there's really nobody out there like Jair that is just graded out in the 70s for like 7 straight years, and then you've got DJ Reed. His coverage grade 80, 70, 70, 70, 70, 70. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's not 7 years like Jair, but it is 6. The guy's not, perfect. He's got his ups and downs or whatever, but overall gave up 431 yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't have any interceptions this past year. He's not a big interception guy. Has 6 over his 7 total years, but a decent amount of pass breakups. He always has kind of a lot of those, which obviously interceptions are better, and Hafley's going to be pushing that. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of a spike because it's, you get what you practice. By spike, I mean, maybe instead of 0 or 1, it's like 2 or 3, But why don't we go ahead and end with this? I got a ton of notes, but it's not super interesting to just kind of jump in. Got to figure out how to best use those. But anyways, I haven't gone through this yet, and it's super interesting. I always love this. This is Kevin Cole. He does the Unexpected Points Substack. He's also got a YouTube channel you can check out, but he did this article. He does it every year. He's been doing it for several years now. Which drills matter the most for defensive line, linebacker, DB? We'll do DB for today because that's what we're paying attention to right now. But it's interesting the way in which he does it. Obviously, we kind of already looked at something sort of like this, but not really. I like the way that he goes about this. So it's interesting because there's 2 different metrics. There's NFL value and draft position cost. So it's super interesting because it shows the difference between how much teams care compared to how much value there actually is. And for example, and this is probably the biggest discrepancy here, safety. There is almost no correlation with any metric at all for safety, period. The short shuttle is the most, and I don't know exactly what these metrics are, but it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For whatever that metric would happen to be. The highest amount of correlation is about probably 0.6 for the short shuttle. The NFL cares about that metric about a 3. But the biggest discrepancy, obviously, which is funny because you would expect teams to know these things, but clearly it's not the case. I mean, teams always talk about they don't really care. It's not that big. Yes, they do. They absolutely do. 40 time. 40 time, there is basically 0 correlation. I can kind of see a little bit of red. It is the smallest of the group, which is saying something because weight and arm length are almost non-existent. 40 is just slightly more non-existent. But it's also the one the teams care about the most. As far as the 40 times correlation to when somebody gets drafted, it is above a 5 out of 5. It's like a 5.5 on this scale. The next most that teams care about is weight, followed by arm length, shuttle, 3-cone, vert, broad, and 10-yard split. And just to be clear, the teams care about the 10-yard split, which is the least, and it's almost the same amount as they should care for the short shuttle, which is to say almost not at all, but maybe a little bit if there's something there. Cornerback is funny because there's several negative correlations here. Weight, that is to say, the bigger you are, the worse it is. There's about a -2 correlation on that, and teams care to about it. So teams generally want bigger corners, and you shouldn't. Arm length, this one I don't understand. Weight you can understand. Arm length is tough to grasp. But it may just have to go with the fact that bigger corners don't tend to produce as well, and bigger corners happen to have longer arms, possibly. I don't know. But this is the one that teams care about the most. It's at about a 4, even though it's at probably beyond a negative 0.5 for correlation. Then you have 40 time. This may have to do with why the Packers struggle at corner so much. The one guy they hit on was Jair, which is a smaller guy. They missed on Stokes, who is a big, really fast guy. They missed on Kevin King, a really big, really fast. They love their really big, really fast corners. Weight, arm length, and 40 time have a negative correlation. What are the two things they care about, the NFL cares about the most? Arm length and 40 time. As far as positive correlations, the one that's almost non-existent is the short shuttle, followed by the 10-yard split, and then you've got some that actually you can almost see some level of correlation, but all three of them are below 0.5. 3-cone, broad jump, and the vert. Very, very, very little correlation. But, of the three that you're looking at where there's something there, broad and vert, are explosion metrics, and then 3-cone just seems to be good for everything. It's just a pretty solid metric. Again, very low correlation, but generally a pretty solid exercise for just about everybody. But it is always funny coming back to this and seeing how much people care. And it's always the 40. Like, one of the interesting ones is edge rusher. Edge rusher, there's actually some decent correlation. Calls it attribute effect. Several. There's let's just go through edge rusher real quick. Weight is inverse and massively beyond -2. So smaller tends to be better. Another probably issue for the Packers. Now, that's not infinite. And that was one of the problems I had when I tried to apply this to the players, because you get to the point where, well, if you were 5 pounds, that would be the best. That's obviously silly. So it would have to be within a range, and you got to kind of figure that all out. I mean, it's kind of self-contained, because generally there are not very many like 220-pound edge rushers. So if you had a 220-pound edge rusher, it would give the false impression that he's a good player, when really you're ignoring the fact that those guys are such big outliers that they are dismissed by this thing. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, so weight is a massively negative correlation. So if you were to choose, for example, between the 275-pound guys and the 245-pound guys in this draft class based on this, you probably lean 245. Packers absolutely tend to lean 265, 75, whatever. The other negative correlation is broad jump, kind of randomly. On the positive side, arm length, almost non-existent. 3-cone, which supposedly is a big one for edge rushers, according to this. By the way, let me just read this real quick. Predicted percentile change per attribute, standard deviation, Z-score, combine participants from 2006 to 2021. So I don't know what he's comparing against, but he's a stats guy, so I take it for something. But again, there are some decent correlations here. So, for example, the vert, about 1.5. The short shuttle, probably 1.5-ish. The 10-yard split, 1.9. And then the 40-yard dash is a little over 2. Call it 2.1. The funny thing, though, is the complete unseriousness of the NFL teams. Because if you look at it, they care about equally for weight, arm length, 10-yard split, broad jump, and short shuttle. And then 40-yard dash is at like a 9. So if you're an edge rusher that runs a 4.45, which, again, that's what we saw yesterday, which was actually kind of funny, where you had Pierce run like a 4.45 or whatever it was, and everybody's talking about, like, this guy's an absolute freak. But if you look at the athletic score, he actually wasn't that high. But everybody's obsession with the 40 time makes it look that way. So NFL teams included in this, with the media and everybody else, will look at it and say, this guy is an absolute and he might be. I'm not saying he's not. I like him. The funny thing is, though, this really just goes back to what I was talking about before. The science of it really comes down to just creating the board. Your number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guy, right? I know they do tiers and all that, but you create these piles of players. After that, it's just kind of stupid people just doing stupid stuff. You know what I mean? There's a reason why there's no GM in the history of the world that just consistently knocks it out of the park, right? It doesn't happen. Teams have really good. Eagles had a couple really good drafts. The Lions had a really good draft. There are teams that come along and they have like a good draft, maybe a couple good drafts, but nobody's just like so good at it they just keep knocking it out of the park. That doesn't happen. So yeah, they as much as I want to give GMs a bunch of credit for And they do deserve a lot of credit. I mean, obviously they know their job better than I do or whatever, but there's some things that you look at and it's like, I just expect you to not do some of the basic stuff. I'll give you an example. Elon Musk. I know it's a sensitive thing or whatever, but Elon Musk is undeniably a genius. He just is. I mean, his brain is broken. I don't know if he's autistic or what the situation is, but there's something where he can just like visualize things, and it's like I read his book and it was kind of crazy. Like he literally can just like visualize things in a way that normal human beings can't. He's a genius. There are times though where he will tweet things, and I look at it and go, it's just not true. Like it's just kind of stupid. Like he'll quote tweet something that was never true, or even some of the silly mistakes. I don't want to get too into it. I know it's all sensitive or whatever, but some of the things you look at and it's like, how could somebody so smart do something like that? I don't understand. But that's kind of how I view GMs. They're freaking geniuses. But every once in a while, they fall into stuff that it's like, how could you fall into this? Getting so excited about 40 times. And again, you can't pretend it doesn't happen. I can see it in the data. But anyways, I'm going to leave it at that for now. Hopefully we get some more buzz going on. We're having a good time. We're all having fun. I see the Packers bump their ticket prices, but I will dig into that a little bit. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Have a good day. I will talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.